Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Queen of the Damned. So, really, I'd reviewed this previously on another channel once upon a time, but here I wanted to really put my best foot forward with this review, and I really wanted to do things differently and review it differently. Really, I would still say that with this film, very much easily won completely over by the soundtrack alone. Some people may not like the certain music who is to be played within this film. It's very much like Slipknot, Disturbed, Deftones, Korn, that kind of mix of music. And so, if you don't like that kind of music, you may not like this movie because really this movie is prominently that kind of music kind of displayed throughout here. But it is really a very interesting vampire movie regardless if you don't like that kind of music. Going into here, really I kind of love the fact that we end up having a vampire come back from sleeping way too long to come back to a time where he wants to be able to be a lead singer of a band, wanting to eventually, instead of trying to hide the fact that he is a vampire, no, he is very open about it, and he also wants other vampires to be more open about it as well. And if that is to besmirch anybody or hurt anyone's feelings, then Lestat is like, well, come out wherever you are and come get me. Come and fight me. Like, I don't care. Like, I'd rather be dead than alone. With me being the only vampire that's out here existing in the ether of things. So we eventually get in this movie to eventually have Lestat almost fighting over two different women for two different reasons. Really, we end up having a girl named Jess, who a lot of people might know from movies like The Mighty Ducks or this film, uh, or the Mighty Ducks Game Changers. Yeah, if you came from that to come to here, it is what it is. Lestat has also been on the guy that plays Lestat, who is Stuart Townsend. Also had done the movie League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and that will be a movie that I will review soon. Uh, but Margaret Moreau, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, um, who plays Jess in this film, is kind of an interesting character. Eventually, you at first start to see how bright and happy that she is, but eventually the further along we go about this movie, the more you start to realize that maybe she's actually a dark and brooding character that isn't quite yet adjusted to the vampire world. We also get Queen Akasha, who of course is played by Aaliyah in this film. Sadly, this was her last film, with the exclusion of, I think she was actually involved in one Matrix movie that sadly they had to take her footage out and replace her with someone else, sadly enough. So she would have actually been involved in a Matrix film, but since her passing, they had to do some reshoots and they had to have someone else do the role. I think it probably would have may have been quite possibly Will Smith's wife's role, maybe, probably. You would assess or assume that'd have to be it. But with that said, yeah, so Aaliyah's career was sadly on the high rise and then all of a sudden, gone too soon, sadly. So, and of course, this movie is dedicated to her, and I really appreciate that. So, going into this film, we really not only have modern time vampirism, if I'm saying that right. Plus, we also have a story of the past that is done in a specific timeline, which I actually do really like. So, because we have to show like a leading up of Lestat eventually becoming a vampire and then eventually deciding to hide away for the rest of his life because it seems that everyone eventually turned on him. And so he realized, like, well, like I'm just gonna go into sleep and sleep until I can hear the right set of music again, and then I will awaken to uh, come forth that music and find that music and and be able to be out and about once again, singing along and so on and so forth. Really, this movie is not a musical. It's just straight up just a movie that I think is really cool and has really good music for me in it. Like I even bought the soundtrack at some point, and I heard that really, I think the lead singer of Korn does everything for the movie, the songs for the film, but I think in the soundtrack we end up having different people doing different songs. We have like Chester Bennington doing one song. We have the lead sitter, we have the lead singer of Disturbed doing one song in here. So like it's kind of interesting to see like the soundtrack compared to the actual movie. It's kind of a little bit different. But anyways, let's go on to just kind of breaking down this film because I think we gotta just go into spoilers. Really, it's a really interesting film. I do like this kind of vampire film, and some people might not. Some people might not like it. Lestat has kind of been used in a variety of different kind of vampire films. Some people might remember Lestat in a movie called Interview with the Vampire, which that Lestat is actually Tom Cruise in that film. So, kind of different Lestats have been kind of plucked and used through a variety of different ways, through a variety of different vampire-ish things. So if Lestat does sound familiar to you, it probably is. So with that said, let's go into that double five time territory to go into spoilers about this film, because really there's not much in a very cryptic like sense to talk about this film. Eventually there is a big huge fight scene, or there's quite a bit of fight scenes that happen at the tail end of this, but really it's just a movie where vampires are trying to understand the modern age, and we have some vampires who are thriving in the modern age because it seems like they have uh, awakened at the perfect time, and some people are just trying to uh, see where they can fit into this modern era of things because it seems like they want to become a part of the world again because they've been hiding for far too long. To eventually we also have characters like Queen Akasha who is going and saying like, yeah, like why have we been hiding away for so long? This makes no sense anymore. It's time for us to really uh, like be the top of the food chain like we always should have been. So I think it's about that time now to go into the spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. In the very beginning of the film, we are to have a vampire that had slept for a fairly long time. He had been rejected by his vampire like people and decided to sleep for a very long time until he was able to hear the right tune of music. So we eventually have Lestat, who is to eventually hear the right tune of music that feels very much modern but also old fashioned Egyptian, which I kind of do really enjoy, and it kind of has that like really cool like swaying sound. It kind of feels like a snake like sound of just like, especially when we have Akasha eventually getting into this film, you could really tell like how really like this music does like have like a movement to it. It's kind of interesting. So we eventually have Lestat who is attracted by this band who is playing this song, and so we immediately have it to where we have Lestat that just appears in these people's room, And so we have Lestat who ends up singing some note, and we end up having the other band members right away just kind of like, wow, that sounds really cool. Like your voice sounds really, really good. And he's like, well, thanks. And so we immediately have Lestat open up to his group, his band members, and tell them that he's a vampire. And they're like, what? Like, are you going to kill me? And he's like, no, like, if anything, like, I'm here to make all your wishes come true. And so they're like, what? Like, is this some kind of, like, what does this mean? So we have Lestat who is not going to turn every single one of these bandmates into vampires. No, like basically he's just gonna be like, hey, like we're gonna become a band, and then like you guys can do your own thing, I'll do my own thing. And so uh so we are to immediately have this band doing incredibly well for themselves. We have Lestat who is opening up about being a vampire to the public, which is a big, big no-no. So we have this Lestat who is having a successful band career-esh like thing to the point of him doing press conferences. Well, his band is doing a press conference. He's doing a live via satellite uh, press conference with them because he doesn't actually want to be there, because I'm assuming since it's probably during the day, or probably also just because uh, it's a person that probably like fears for their life for any number of reasons. Probably just like he just didn't want to appear that day. Uh, in fear of like his bandmates getting attacked by some vampire, and like you can immediately just have Lestat just say like, no, like I want to just do my own thing, my own little video. Let's just say for safety's sake that this recording was done during the day. That's why he via satellited. So we end up having a lot of people asking to prove that Lestat is a vampire, and Lestat is like, well, I can prove it to you later on in your apartment room tonight if that's what you want. It's like, yeah, I can prove it to you by killing you. And like the woman is like, yeah, no, how about no? So eventually, through this press conference, eventually one of the people asked, it's like, well, considering there is some references to vampirism and supposedly hidden messages that not everyone's aware of, like what message do you want to send to any number of your vampires that know full well that you're awake and you're here? And we have Lestat who's like, well, come out, wherever you are. Kind of really just saying, like, dude, I don't want to be alone anymore. Like, come on out, and, like, if you have to kill me, go ahead. Like, if you have to, like, whatever you need to do, like, get it over with. So, we are to see a girl who is named Jess. It seems that Jess has a history with quite possibly vampires also. Jess is to have a uh, family member named um, Maharet. Maharet? Uh, Lena Olin is her actual actor's name. And Marahet, good God. Let's go Mara for short. Mara was a vampire as well, and Jess was too young to really realize it. At some point, we had Marahet, who was to cry blood, and we had Jess, who tried to wipe the blood off of her family member's face, to have Marahet trying to like stop Jess from going and because she almost put it in her mouth to just kind of like wipe it clean, and it's like, no, like that's not the thing to do. So Jess has ties to vampires. I guess vampires run in her family at some point. And so eventually Jess becomes a investigator of vampirism. And so Jess is going and watching the news and seeing a music video of Lestats and his band, and she's realizing, like, you know what, like, these lyrics just sound very odd to me. And so eventually she goes to look them up to realize that there seems to actually be a location called uh, Admiral's Arms. I think that's the place, the location. And so it seems that tons and tons upon decades ago, that place used to be a pub of sorts, and that, I guess, has always been a vampire nest. So we have Jess, who went out of her way to go and take a picture of the location. And so Jess is to go on to talk to a lot of her other vampire-ish like watchers, like David Talbot and some other characters, to tell them about this location that feels obvious like a vampire nest. They see that she had taken a photo of this location of the Admiral's Arms, and they're like, well, like, this is field work and you should not have been doing that. And so we eventually have David, who is to pull Jess aside and to eventually tell her a little bit about Lestat. It seems that Lestat was to be connected to a guy named Marius. The guy that actually plays Marius actually did play in Crow City of Angels, and I didn't realize that, or I didn't remember that until me kind of going through the IMDb, and I'm like, hey, this guy looks familiar. I wonder why. So we go and we have David, who has a bizarrish amount of collections of Marius paintings. And so we have it to where, like, these paintings have been dated and have been, like, fairly old. And so we have it to where David is uh, telling Jess that Marius had been the one who had turned Lestat. And then we have David, who ends up giving Jess Lestat's book, his diary of his journeys. And so now we have Jess going and reading Lestat's diary, and so we are to go into Lestat's past. So we have Lestat, who was just found by Marius. It seems that he was some kind of sailor or something of sorts, and he was just to arrive via Marius's house for some strange reason. Marius was to eventually just go and grab on to Lestat and bite onto him as Lestat was trying to leave, not understanding what exactly was going on. So we eventually have Marius, who is telling Lestat, it's like, hey, like, this will only hurt a little because you're going to basically die. So Lestat, of course, becomes one of Marius's sired vampires. And so we have Marius, who is telling Lestat the ropes of being a vampire, like telling Lestat to drink as much as possible, but to leave the last drop, and because it will, like, there's a whole reason for that, for him draining a human being. So we go on, and we are to eventually have Lestat meet some beautiful woman, and she's playing the violin. And so we have it to where Lestat is to pick up a violin also and start playing with her. The only thing is that he is starting to play at a super speed, to where eventually we have this woman who's freaking out by how fast that Lestat is playing the violin because that is unnatural. So this violinist is to run off, and Marius is to come to Lestat's uh, way of learning, and I had to curve my way to figure out how to explain this. And so we have Marius who's telling Lestat that he needs to go and run after her. He needs to go and kill her because she had witnessed something that she should not have. And so we forcibly end up having Lestat, who is to go on and have to kill these people he didn't want to. And then, so pushing on, so Lestat is to eventually go and continue to play his violin and to eventually drop his bow of his violin into some secret cavern-ish like thing that leads him into this underground spot to where it seems like there is a bunch of statues that exist there. Statues that are sitting in chairs or thrones, all made of statue. So we are to have Lestat, who is to start playing his violin to just this statue because he has nothing better to do. And so we have Lestat who is playing this violin, and immediately after he is dubbed to be finished, we have Queen Akasha, who is a statue who now all of a sudden moves. All of a sudden moving to have Lestat bite onto her arm. So after Lestat is done biting Akasha, he eventually is found by Marius. And so we have really Lestat, who is very, very powerful, and he's very antsy, he's very really charged, and Marius is like, yeah, you made a big mistake. It's like, if anything, you bit off the arm of a vampire that you should not have, because reasonably, that's going to really accelerate you and really just get you to the point of you've bitten off the wrong arm. So we have it to where Lestat is like, you know what, I'm just kind of sick of all your rules, and I'm kind of sick of all why can't I just do whatever I want kind of thing. And so that what causes a rift between Marius and Lestat, to where eventually that's why Marius just decides to go into exile, to eventually just hide into a coffin until he is to hear the right music. So we have it to where after Jess is reading this whole book, she is to eventually go to the Admiral's Arms to call out for a guy named Marius around other vampires. Because they are to ask why she is here, is anybody calling for her kind of thing? Is she claimed by anyone? And so Jess is to call that Marius is the one that has claimed her. And a lot of the vampires are like, dude, that sounds like an ancient, that doesn't sound right. If anything, I don't think you have any kind of claims or whatever into this establishment. While Jess is kind of watching as vampires are chewing through humans like it's nobody's business, we end up having Jess, who is to realize that she's kind of toting the line of maybe she's ready for this world, maybe she is not. Because eventually the way she freaks out kind of tells you that she probably is not ready for this world. So we go on, and we have Jess, who leaves the Admiral's Arms to eventually to be ambushed by the vampires that were in the bar, basically telling her that she was going to get hurt and whatever. So basically bitten, you know what I mean. So we end up having Lestat, who ends up going and saving Jess to eventually uh, to eventually go, or Lestat eventually goes and saves Jess, and then Jess is to talk to Lestat, basically telling him that he had read, like he knew, she knew things about Lestat, and Lestat is like, like, what do you know about me? It's like, if anything, I guess you know Marius, which, like, was a friend of mine, but that's all you really know. We have Jess, who is to talk about things of Lestat's past, and so we have Lestat is like, oh, you must be a Telemuscan. Like, if anything, you're just a librarian. You're nothing to me. And so we have Jess who's like, well, like if I'm nothing, if I'm just human to you, then here's one thing that probably isn't in your book, but I know you probably still have. You probably still have that violin now, don't you? The violin of which that Lestat was to come out of the coffin with, the violin that I'm assuming or assessing that he probably, yeah, he did keep. And Jess was correct. So we end up having Lestat trying to scare Jess off because he's angry, but that's all he does. So we go on to eventually have Jess seemingly give up, but not so much. So we go on, and so we eventually have Lestat, who is to eventually reconnect with Marius. And so we have Marius, who's wearing red velvet, and Lestat is to give him crap about it, because, like, how did you survive through the 50s while wearing red velvet? And Marius mentioned that he just slept. So we have Lestat, who is getting warned by Marius that there are people that are eventually going to come for him. And Lestat is like, dude, let them come. Like, let them come. So we have Lestat and Marius, who are to go on and to sit on this billboard, and Marius is really impressed by this. It's like, wow, like, we have such a drastic change of the times within our time period. So we have also that Marius is telling Lestat that not only are people coming for him, but eventually he should sense that also Queen Akasha is also going to be coming back as well. And he's also to tell Lestat that Queen Akasha had killed her own king, the king of which that no longer wanted a taste for bloodshed anymore, and so he hid away, and so did his queen. And so we have Queen Akasha, who ended up waking up to kill her king to eventually find a new one. So we go on. So we have Queen Akasha, who is to eventually arrive into the Admiral's arms, to eventually have her ask for Lestat. And so we have a lot of people saying, oh, Lestat, like, yeah, he's probably going to be dead pretty soon because of all the like all the music that he's been doing, and all like the red flags that he's been uh, throwing out there for other vampires to no longer ignore. So we have Queen Akasha, who's like, oh, well, like, so if he's gonna die then, because you say so, well, I guess that I'm gonna have to just figure out how that cannot happen. So we have Queen Akasha, who is to go and just start dusting a lot of these vampires. Just a wave of her hand, she just starts dusting all these vampires in this bar, to this really cool music, to where she's like doing this like swaying snake like dance back and forth, to this really cool song, and she is just dusting all of these vampires. It's pretty cool. She also rips out the heart of one of the vampires and just drinks the blood out of it. And so, yeah, she just starts tearing through all of these vampires that uh, are in this establishment, because really she is just kind of like, well, if anybody's to have a wrong thing to say about Lestat, I'm just going to kill everyone. So we are to eventually push on, and so we have Lestat, who is eventually going and eventually somewhere down the road having a big concert that is only going to be a one-off thing. We have to where Lestat is saying, yeah, I don't really want to repeat myself, so if anything, we're going to do a big, huge concert in Death Valley, but that's somewhere down the road. So we end up having an exclusive, or we end up finding out also, I kind of skipped about something. We also have Lestat, who seemingly, either before or after every concert, eventually goes and has his manager pick out two women. And so eventually we have Lestat, who goes on to uh, have these two women be picked, and so he is to go and freak them out. We have a scene where these girls are kind of just like asking Lestat, hey, like, what are you interested in? They kind of like undo his pants, and Lestat is like, no, I don't want that. And so we have the girls who are just kind of crawling around on all fours, and Lestat is like, oh, okay. So we have the girls who are asking him, it's like, well, are you hungry for something? And so we eventually have Lestat, who goes on to start to crawl like they are, but eventually he is to start crawling onto the walls and crawling onto the ceiling, and eventually that really starts to freak them out, but they're paralyzed with fear. They don't move anywhere. So eventually Lestat just drops onto them and kills both of them. That's the first time. So we go on to the second time, and so we have Lestat, who is to see two women. One of them is a Episcopalian and whichever, and the other is Jess. To really have Jess like, dude, I want to keep, I want to keep coming to this guy and like keep irritating the crap out of him, so that way he'll eventually do what I want, or he'll eventually listen to me. So we have Lestat, who lets the Episcopalian like go back to church, and so we have Lestat, who is going to talk with Jess, because Jess is asking Lestat to turn her, and we have it to where Jess cuts a part of her chest open. Lestat is looking at her, and he's tempted, but he's like, you don't know what you're in for. Like, you don't know what it's like to live forever. And so I'm going to show this to you. So we end up thinking Lestat is going to take Jess and suck the life out of her, but instead he ends up grabbing her and flying her to this location to where Lestat is going to show how exactly a vampire is. So it seems that there's a vampire with some woman that seems to be very drunk. It seems like they are kissing and whichever. Lestat scares the other vampire off. Lestat goes to this woman and just starts like grabbing onto her and having her like scream in despair and desperate for anyone to help her. And she is to die. And so Lestat is like, is that what you want? Is that what you want? And so Jess is like, well, maybe not. Like, yeah, I thought so. Like, like I thought so. So, but that doesn't stop Jess from wanting to either try to help Lestat or try to be close to him. Like, I don't get we have to where Jess mentioned that his diary really touched her, and she really likes him. But yeah, so we go on, and so we are to push even further into this movie, and so we are to have the Death Valley concert. I think I kind of covered a bulk of this movie, but if anything, there might have been something that probably slipped in the cracks somewhere. So we are to have Lestat do this Death Valley concert, and so he is to go and perform. Like the way of which that he gets into this concert, has the song "Down with the Sickness" by Disturbed in it. I'm like, yeah. I don't know. I think I got so much into the music into this movie that there is like bits and pieces of this movie that I was just like, I don't care. I'm just listening to the music. Like, man, like this is such a good thing to come back into just for the music alone. So, like again, this might not be our musical arrangement or assortment or whatever, but if you do like the music, then good for you. Because man, was it fun. So, so we have Lestat going in and doing, of course, one song. Uh, uh, I don't know exactly what it's called, but I know Chester Bennington sings the song actually in the soundtrack, and then the second song he dedicates for the ones who come for me. And so he ends up singing this jury is coming song. The jury is coming, coming to tear me apart. That is like, and the whole entire time we end up having these three vampires who had seen the Lestat video telling the vampires to come out wherever they are. And so we have these vampires who are angry that Lestat had done that video. And so we consistently have this like fast forward thing going on where there's a ton of people all like partying in the crowd, but we end up having these three vampires just stick out, and then like they're the only ones standing there, that you can easily see them, but everything else is going in fast forward motion. I thought that was such, like, I thought that was such an interesting way to like cut this. Like, did they do it to where like they had the vampires like there, and then they like, and then they added the crowd in later? Like, I kind of wonder how they shot that. Or maybe they just like had some computer effects going where they can focus on one person and have that go in perfect time, and then everything else sped up. I'm kind of curious how they did that. So we consistently have these three vampires that are all going in the motion of which that they are going. We have Jess, who is noticing the crowd, who are vampires and who aren't, and so we have Jess, who is screaming out for Lestat to try and help him. We have also Marius and all of the other ancient Esh-like vampires, as well with Jess's family member, Marriott. And so Marriott is to call for one of her other vampires to go and try to seek out Jess. So that way she can be protected, because Marriott is, of course, one of her family members, one of her close family. And so we eventually are having Marius and these ancients kind of waiting to see what is to happen. So we have one vampire who ends up jumping onto the stage, I think knocking down a bodyguard or two. And so we have Lestat, who grabs his mic stand and thrusts it into one of the vampires, of course, killing him. And so we have vampires that are starting to one by one arrive. And so we have Lestat, who is just like flying around and flipping and all kinds of these things, taking these vampires out. But when Lestat is to eventually get outnumbered, Marius jumps in and tries to help him out as well. To where it seems that Lestat and Marius start to get outnumbered, and we have Queen Akasha come in and start dusting some of these vampires. So we have Queen Akasha who is to grab Lestat and kind of have their getaway time. So basically, we have Queen Akasha who is to quickly make Lestat her king and to basically have their night of passion. And the night after that, we are starting to notice that it seems that Queen Akasha is leaving quite a bloodbath in her way. Numerous people dying on a beach, numerous people just dying everywhere. And so we have Lestat who's like, you know what, like, why do we have to kill so many? And Queen is just like, well, like they had no real true future. Like, if anything, like there was nothing for them um to dream for, to strive for. That's why I took them all out. And so Lestat is like, well, yeah, but like we didn't have to wipe so many out. Like it just feels like we're just killing every single human out there, and then we're never gonna have a food source ever again. So we are to push on, and so we are to have Queen who is to officially crown Lestat. Like basically just kind of giving him some clothes isn't quite good enough. He needs to have an official like ceremony and crowning and all kinds of stuff. And so we have Akasha and Lestat going to this location, and all the other vampires are to follow. And so we have the queen who is to talk to all the vampires and to tell them like, well, like we need to be way more out of the open than you guys have been with your hiding in secret and having back alley deals with humans. Like that's kind of a garbage way of living. Like, if anything, we need to be out there like Lestat has been, and that's why I have chosen him to be my king. And so we have the queen who's asking all the other vampires, is like, well, you either like rule under me or you die. And we have all the other vampires are like, well, no, like I'm not gonna go with you. Like I'm not gonna do what you want. And so we have Lestat who's like, well, hey, where's my crown? And so we have Akasha who just decides to lend Lestat her arm. Lestat is to bite onto it, and so Akasha is like, see how obedient he is? Like, see how good he is? Like a good little doggy. Pat, pat, little Lestat. And so we have Lestat who is biting on the arm of Akasha and is really trying to drain her out. And so we have Akash who's like, well, hey, like, okay, like, I think you're done, Lestat, and he's not letting go. And so we have Akasha who has to thrust Lestat off of her, and all the other vampires jump onto Akasha to try and drain her. Akasha is fairly weak. She can't use the powers that she is to have. Eventually, she starts dusting a vampire here and there, but she starts to grow really weak. To where eventually, when most of the vampires start to drop off, we have Lestat who ends up trying to make a second run, and so we have Akasha trying to use her powers, but it won't work against Lestat because Lestat had drained her of a lot of her blood, but also like Lestat has had a consistent strain of Akasha's blood compared to everyone else. So we have Lestat who is again biting into Akasha's neck, and we eventually have Maryhet uh, telling Lestat he needs to stop because he cannot drain her of her of her blood completely. So we have Marriott who goes and drains Akasha of her blood completely, which turns Akasha into a husk of a vampire, and she ends up breaking onto the ground and is dead. We have Marriott, who is to turn into a statue, originally like Akasha had. And so, because it seems that Marriott had taken uh, Akasha's death into her, and that forced her into becoming a statue. So, we. Oh, and there was also a moment where Lestat had to go and prove his worthiness to Akasha, and so Lestat had to forcibly go and bite Jess and forcibly turn her, not kill her. It looked like he killed her, but she just turned. So Akasha didn't know the difference. So we go on, and everything is seemingly taken care of. So we have Jess and Lestat who are returning the diary to David. And so David is asking Jess what it's like. And so Jess is asking David, it's like, well, do you want to be turned into a vampire? And David's like, well, no, because like I'm too old to live forever. So we have Jess and Lestat going off to eventually go and perform their vampire like duties for the night. And so we have Marius, who is popping into David's home to go after David, because we have Marius who saw David at the concert, and so Marius is telling David, hey, like, I have a new painting for you, David. Like, hey, we should get together sometime and like have a talk, because it seems like both of them hate one another. And so we have David, who thinks that Jess is coming back, and instead it is Marius to come and attack him and kill him. So yeah, really, I think that covered a bulk of this movie. And with that said, I think I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.